Hello students, welcome to Biology 130, a very brief introduction to how this course works, just to get you started. I'll be your instructor for this semester. My name is Greg Doheny. That's sort of what I look like over here. Picture's a couple years old, I guess, but that is sort of what I look like. My email address is indicated here. And I will be holding some office hours this semester, and you can find out what they are as soon as you visit the Biology 130 website on your computer. So if you log into your Columbia College student portal as either on your phone or on your computer, and then you log in, you should see links to all of the websites for all of your currently registered courses, and including Biology 130. Now, you may notice that you have a Biology 130 lecture section page and a Biology 130 lab section page, and there's actually nothing on the Biology 130 lab section page because I'm your instructor for both the lecture section of the course and the laboratory section of the course. We generally at the college have two web pages in case you have one instructor for the lecture section of the course and another instructor for the lab section, but in the case of this course that's not necessary because I'm the instructor for both. So ignore the Biology 130 lab page and just take a quick look as soon as you possibly can at the Biology 130 lecture section page, because all of the information regarding the course is on that page. Now the course itself, this is the flipped hybrid, the flipped hybrid version of the course, which means that we spend less time in class, and the time that we do spend in class is dedicated to answering questions, having discussions, carrying out exercises, and having tests. That is actually what a flipped classroom is, where you watch instead, rather than attending lectures and having me talk over some slides on a whiteboard, I've pre-recorded those lectures and you can watch them at your convenience. Anytime that it's convenient for you, you can watch the lectures and make notes on them. And then the time that we actually go into class, we spend doing other things that are more important to the learning process, like carrying out exercises and having discussions and doing things like that. So this is the flipped course, and for the times that we do spend in class, we will be spending Mondays from 2 to 4 in room 434, which is the biology lab. I turn it into an anatomy lab when I'm teaching anatomy and physiology in it, but the Monday session will be held in the lab, which is in room 343. And then we will have another session on Thursdays from 2 to 4 in room 420, which is sort of almost right next to the biology lab, so not very far away. But room 420 is a computer laboratory. And so we will be using the computer to do some exercises and some evaluations and tests, which is why we're doing the second half of the course in the computer lab. Okay, so as I said before, as soon as you can see the web page, as soon as you can see the Moodle web page, take a look at it, and that will give you some ideas about what to do next. Okay, as I mentioned before, this is the flipped hybrid version of the Anatomy and Physiology 1 course, where you get to watch the lectures on video on your own time when it's convenient to you, and then when we are actually in class, we're spending time doing exercises and discussions and other things. There are actually certain advantages to watching pre-recorded lectures rather than live ones. The first advantage is that you don't have to make as much time in your schedule to attend class, because the videos are at your fingertips basically anytime that you want. And so you can watch the videos and lectures when they're convenient to you. You therefore spend less time in class, and you get to replay any parts that you didn't quite understand. And most importantly, if you look down at the bottom of this list of advantages to having pre-recorded lectures, you'll notice that you cannot, these lectures are being linked to you from a website called YouTube. YouTube, of course, which most of you are probably familiar with, you know that YouTube has a feature that allows you to turn on a transcript, which means that you can actually you can listen to the words that I'm speaking, but you can also see a simultaneous transcript that writes what I'm saying as well. So you get to hear my words, but also if I'm not being clear, or if I'm speaking too fast, which I often do, if you have any trouble with that, you simply turn on the transcript for what I'm saying, and you can read the words as well. In fact, in some cases, depending on what other languages you may speak, you also have the ability to translate into your own language, into another language. So the one of the big advantages, of course, to watching lectures on YouTube is pre-recorded lectures on YouTube is that you get to turn on the transcript feature. Okay, the transcript feature. Here is what a YouTube movie looks like, and then usually down here in the bottom corner, of the YouTube window, there's a button which is right below this screen that I've shown you here. There's a button that says Turn on Transcript, and if you turn on the transcript, you get another window that opens up on the side and gives you a written readout of what I'm saying. So that is a definite advantage for listening to the lecture or watching the lectures on YouTube rather than attending class and taking notes. And as I said, you can rewind and so forth. All right. What will we actually do in the lecture section of the class? So we have a lab section for the class and a lecture section. So the lecture section is going to be on Thursdays. And what I'm going to do every Thursday is I'm going to give you a brief review. I'll talk briefly about what you just learned in the lecture from the previous week. Right? And then I will also give you a preview lecture of what videos you're supposed to be listening to this week. Right? So we'll have a preview, we'll have a review of the lecture that you just studied, and we'll have a preview of the lecture that you're just about to study. And I will also give you the chance to ask me questions about anything you don't understand. Please don't be timid. You pay a lot of money for these courses, and what you're paying for really is to get access to your teachers, right? And so it's within your interest. It's in your best interests to be aggressive with your questions. Anything that's bothering you, don't hesitate to ask questions. Don't worry about what other people may think if you ask questions. I was terrified of that as a student. I thought if I ask a question, all the other students will think I'm dumb. Of course, that was not true at all. If I'm confused, most of the other students were probably confused as well, and they were grateful that I asked the question. And the same thing will be true of you. Other people probably don't understand if you're confused about a certain issue. Other people will be confused as well, and they'll actually be grateful to you for asking a question that perhaps they were too timid to ask. So I would encourage people to ask questions during these sessions. And then we move on to, we may do an exercise in some cases. There are a few different exercises that are part of this course. But in addition, we will also then move on to evaluations. Right, and so every week we will have a quiz on the new material that you were supposed to have studied in the previous lecture. And then after that's done, we will have a review quiz, which is a cumulative quiz about any of the material that you've learned in previous lectures. Right, so you have to learn new material every week, but you could also be quizzed on any of the previous material that you've already learned. And the reason for that is because you need to have a little bit of incentive to review the material regularly, review the previous material regularly. So one of the things that many students don't realize is that in order to learn material, there's a memorization process. You read it and you memorize it. But if you don't recall it, if you don't recall the information regularly, you'll simply lose it, right? So if you don't practice, if you memorize material, all of that effort is wasted if you don't review it regularly, because it's bringing it back out of your memory that actually establishes the link to the information. So it's very important to learn new material, but to continuously review the material that you've already learned so that you don't forget it. There's some very depressing statistics that are out there that says that most students forget about 50% of what they learned in a course after the final exam. But the amount of material that you forget becomes much less if you had reviewed the material several times during the course. So the review quiz is very important, possibly more important than the new material quiz. Okay, and then while the class is writing these two tests on the computer, I'm going to bring in a mannequin, which and place this mannequin in the back of the room, and I'm going to call you the students one at a time to the back of the room, and I'm going to hand you a card which has a body part written on it. and your job is to show me where that is on the mannequin, right? So that is called a location test. So the location test is where I'm going to give you I'm going to randomly give you 5 different cards, and you're supposed to 5 different cards that have the names of different body parts or different organs or different structures of the body, and you're supposed to point out to me where they are. Why do I give you a card instead of just asking you? Because I don't want the other students in the lab to hear what I ask you. So some people may peek around. The mannequin is going to be located at the back of the classroom. Some people may peek and look and see where you've pointed to, but they don't know what I asked you. So because they didn't hear me ask you that. So that's the rationale behind giving you a written card instead of just asking you, show me the cervix, show me the antecubitus, show me the brachial region of the body. Right? I could say that, but in fact, I'm going to write those things onto flashcards and then hand you 5 flashcards, and you're supposed to show me where those 5 body parts are. So the review quiz every week is worth 1% of your grade. The preview quiz is worth 1% of your grade, and the location test is worth 1% as well. So that means every week during the lecture section, you're going to earn 3% of your grade. Then we also, in addition to the lecture section, we also have a lab section where we do other things, which I'll talk about next. Right. So one more time, the location test is where you simply locate a part of the body that I asked you about. Right now, I couldn't ask you about just any part of the body. Every week, I'm specifically going to ask you about to locate body parts from a certain list. So you'll be given the names of the body parts that I will ask you about in advance for you to study. All right, so the first thing that you should do when you get to the course website is on the college website, and it's presented with a program called Moodle. Moodle is what's known as a classroom resource computer program, which allows teachers to organize the teaching materials for a class into a web page so that the students can use it. So if you go to the Biology 130 Moodle site, the website which is presented in Moodle, you will see one of the first things that you'll see is that there's a lab manual on the website. And the first thing you should do is download the lab manual and start reading through it. And in the lab manual, among other things, you will find a list of the body parts that I'm going to ask you about every week during the location test. Right? So get to the website, get out the lab manual, and here is a typical list of body parts to identify for location test number 1. So this is location test number 1 is in the 2nd or 3rd week of class, I believe. I'm going to call you to the back of each of you individually to the back of the classroom and ask you to identify one of these areas on the mannequin. So in fact, what I'll do is I'll ask you on the first week, during the first location test, I'm going to ask you to identify 5 of these parts. The next week, I'm going to ask you the locations of 2 new parts that you've just learned for that week, and then 3 old parts that you've learned from any previous weeks, right? So I'll ask you the locations of 2 new body parts or 2 new body regions, and I will ask you the locations of 3 that you should already have learned for previous weeks. So once again, those review questions are there to encourage you to review the material regularly. All right, so in addition to the lecture material, in addition to the review test, the new material quiz, and the location test, we're also going to do some other things on Thursdays. We're going to do a pre-midterm exam in week 5, the 5th week of the course, which is worth 5% of your grade. We're going to do a midterm exam, which is worth 20% of your grade during week 7. You might realize at this point that all courses at Columbia are organized into a 13-week schedule where we have 13 weeks of instruction followed by 1 week of exams. So we have our pre-midterm exam in this particular class. We have the pre-midterm exam in week 5. And then we have the midterm exam in week 7, and then we have the final exam in week 14, which is worth 35% of your grade. And the exact date of that exam will be to be announced later. Okay, so in addition to the pre-midterm, the midterm, and the final, we will also, during the lecture periods, we will have 3 open book tests. Now, an open book test means that you get to Unlike a regular test where everything has to come from your memory, in a open book test, you bring the textbook with you and you look up the answers as I'm asking them. So in a regular test, I'm asking you about things that you were supposed to have memorized, and in the open book test, I'm asking you about things that you're looking up in the book, that you're actively looking up in the book right now, or at that point in time. So we're going to have one of the open book tests on bones, another one on the muscles, and a third one on the blood vessels. The reason for this is because in anatomy and physiology, so much of it has to do with the bones, the muscles, and the blood vessels. The other organs, kidneys, livers, brains, hearts, and things like that are fine, but there's not really as much to learn about those organs as there is to learn about bones, muscles, and blood vessels. Believe me, there are lots of them. Right? For example, there are 206 bones in the human body. I don't know offhand how many muscles there are, but there's a lot more muscles and a lot more blood vessels than there are bones. So there's quite a few. So these open book tests, it's not reasonable to ask you to memorize everything, and you wouldn't have to do that as an allied health professional anyway. You would be allowed to look at you'd be allowed to look at different books and things to do your work. So one of the skills that you need to have for as an academic in general is you have to know how to extract information from a reliable textbook. So we are going to have a book, but which one? I will tell you about that now. This is the book that is compulsory reading for this course. It's called the Anatomy and Physiology Coloring Book, and it is available in the college bookstore. It's for about $30, and I believe it's also available on Amazon or any other bookseller that you want to buy where you buy your books. You can get it at Chapters Books. You can get it at another college bookstore, and the only condition is that you have to get the fourth edition. The fourth edition, because the first, second, and third editions will not, the page numbers will not match what I'm asking you to study. So if you buy a first, second, or third edition, you're kind of wasting your money because my questions come from the fourth edition. Okay, so in this book there are three chapters. There's one chapter on bones, one chapter on muscles, and one chapter on blood vessels. So that is the book that you'll take to class in order to write the open book tests. You can, of course, you can buy a used edition from a friend if you have somebody that's looking to sell somebody that took this course in the past and they're looking to sell their coloring book. That's fine, as long as you have access to the book. As long as you have access to the book, you can do the exercises. Now, speaking of books, the anatomy coloring workbook. You notice that that's actually the American spelling of color. In Canada, we use the COLOURING spelling, but that's okay because the book is published in the US, so we just have that spelling. So the anatomy and coloring workbook, the fourth edition, is required. And then there's a suggested textbook called Anatomy and Physiology by Betts et al. Right? And this is suggested, and it is free. It's a free textbook. If you're interested in anatomy and physiology, and you're curious about it, and you want to read more detail than I'm giving you in the lectures, you're free to read that book. I would recommend it, but I would not actually ask you. I wouldn't actually recommend it. I would only suggest it if you're really interested if you're very keen and you want more details. Otherwise, it has more detail than you would ever need to pass this course. So it's there as a resource for you, but I'm not recommending that you read it. I'm just suggesting that you could have it as a resource, and it is free, so why not take advantage of it? Okay, so there are two textbooks for this course. One of them is required. The Anatomy Coloring Workbook is required, the fourth edition, and the other one is simply a suggestion if you're interested in reading more about anatomy. All right, we talked about what we're doing in every lecture section. Let's talk about what we're going to do in every lab section. So eventually, in the third week, I'm going to assign you to a group, and the class is going to be divided into 6 groups. There are 6 in the anatomy lab. There are 6 benches, which I also call tables. And your group will be assigned to one of those tables. And at every one of these tables, there will be a set of different anatomy models. And your group will be required to memorize the body parts of those models for that particular week. And what's going to happen is that I give you the questions, I give you the body parts that you're supposed to memorize for that particular the models at that particular table that week. So you have them in advance. You also have the coloring workbook. And so if I give you a little explanation of what each body part is, but if you want to find, you do need to find out exactly where it is, exactly on where it is on these models that are at your particular table. And you would do that by looking in your coloring book, right? And so you need to learn how to look things up in the index at the end and a table of contents at the beginning. And learning how to find something in a textbook is part of one of the skills that an academic like you should have. So you have your coloring book. You will have a list of body parts every week that you're supposed to memorize. The body parts are all found in these models that are at your table for that week. And then I will come around during the lab and I will ask each of you to, what I'll do is for each of you, I will point to one structure or body part on those models and ask you to tell me what it is. So you have to tell me the name of the body part for each week. And so if you do that correctly, I just point to one body part, you tell me what it is, you get 1 point. So 1% of your mark every week comes from what you get 1% every week from the lab where you identify a body part at a table. And then the next week, your group will rotate to the next table, and you have to memorize a new list of body parts and where they would be found. And so you do this, and in total, there are 6 table rotations worth 6% of your grade. So you can see that 6% of your grade is really not that much. So there's no need to get into a panic about this. But you should be able to read it. I mean, you should probably be able to memorize all the body parts. And then at the end of the semester, in addition to the 6 table rotations that we do, we will also have a laboratory exam, a comprehensive laboratory exam that's worth 10% of your mark. And in that laboratory exam, I will bring you into the laboratory one by one and point to 10 different body parts on the models, and you have to identify all 10 of them for 1 point each, for 1% of your mark each. So that's the main thing that we're going to do in the lab. In addition, it's not written here on the list, but in addition, we're also going to, in the lab, learn how to take vital signs. So we will learn how to take blood pressure, how to determine something called vital lung capacity, how to take a pulse at 2 or 3 different places. So that's basically what we'll do. We'll learn how to take blood pressure, lung vital capacity, pulse, and I think that's the only vitals. Those are the only vitals that we learn in the lab, but that's enough. We also have a stethoscope there, so you can check the heart valves. You can check your own heart valves or somebody else's heart valves if they volunteer to let you measure their heart valves. You're free to use the stethoscope and see if you can measure, if you can determine if the heart valves are functioning through something called auscultation. All right, so we also, in addition to the lab, so we do 6 table rotations in the lab. In addition to that, we also do learn how to measure vital signs, and finally, we have a lab exam at the end of the year. Those 6 table rotations, 6%, the laboratory exam, 10%, and in addition, the location tests that you're doing on Thursdays count as part of the lab as well. So we have 6% for the 6 table rotations, 6% for the 6 location tests, and 10% for the lab exam. So that gives us 22%. 22% of your grade is determined by the laboratory activities. Okay, so this is a page out of your lab manual. Again, you should get a hold of the lab manual, download it, and start reading it. It tells you a lot more information than I am here on this slideshow. And this is the table A list of organs, right? So at table A, we have a human skeleton. It's not a real skeleton, by the way. It's plastic, so you don't have to worry about that. But the clavicle, for instance, body part number 1, the clavicle is commonly known as the collarbone, right? The clavicle. So you need to know, if I point to the clavicle, you need to say that's the clavicle. The scapula is commonly known as the shoulder blade, right? The scapula, commonly known as the shoulder blade. If I point to that, you would say that. So you have to just learn the names of these body parts and where they are. It's actually quite hard, but it's not worth that much, so it's only worth 1% per week, so don't worry too much about getting it wrong. But if you're a good student, you should be able to give it your best effort and then see if you can memorize those body parts. And certainly at the end of the semester, you have to name 10 of them from all of the, and by the way, during the lab exam at the end of the year, the only body parts that I will ask you about are the ones that you learned about during the table rotations. So I'm not going to spring an unknown body. I couldn't ask you. I'm not going to ask you about any possible body part, just the ones that you were asked to learn during the table rotation exercise. Okay, so how is your lab mark broken down? As I said, we have 6 table rotations and 6 location tests and 1 lab exam for a total of 22% of your grade. Now, I have to tell you about something slightly unpleasant, but this is a standard laboratory policy for courses that have laboratory sections at Columbia. Other colleges in British Columbia also have similar rules, which are that the labs are not worth as much as the lecture section of a course. The lab section of a course is not worth as much as the lecture section. So we have to give you some more incentive because the lab section is critical. We give you more incentive to attend all of the labs and do all of the lab exercises. So it is Columbia policy that if you miss 3 of the labs, you fail the course automatically. Fail the entire course, not just the lab section. Second, if you score less than 50% in the lab, since the lab is worth 22, that means if you get less than 11% out of the 22% that's available for the lab activities, you can only receive a maximum of D, no matter how well you do in the theory part of the course, no matter how well you do in the lecture part of the course. And that means that if you get 11 out of 22 for the lab, and then you score 70 or 70 out of 75 for the lecture section, you would still only get a D. Right? And so regardless of how well you do in the lecture section, if you score less than 50% of the lab, you only get a D for the course, and that's it. You would only get a D provided that you have more than 50% for the course as a whole. Right? So if you add up everything you got in the lab and everything you got in the lecture, and it's 49%, and you failed the lab, obviously you would fail the whole course. If you add up everything you've got and it's 90%, but you failed the lab, you would get a D. Right? So the message from that is come to every lab, get more than 50% on the lab activities, and then that's not an issue anymore. Failure is not a problem from the lab standpoint. If you still get less than 50% in the course, you would fail it, but otherwise you're not failing it because you failed the lab portion. Okay, so that's not anything that's unique to the anatomy lab. That's also true for biology 100, 110, 120, any of the other biology courses. It's also true for physics and chemistry. All right, so how are your marks broken down? As we said, we had 6 table rotations that determine 6% of your grade, 6 location exercises that determine 6% of your grade, 6 quizzes on the material that you just learned from the latest lecture, 6 review quizzes on the material that you were supposed to have learned from previous lectures, not the one we were discussing that week, for example, 3 open book tests that are worth 6%, 2% each, a pre-midterm that is worth 5%, and then a midterm exam, which is worth 20%. The midterm and the pre-midterm, by the way, are the same format. So basically, it's the pre-midterm is just like the midterm, except it's only worth 5% instead of 20. And the main purpose of the pre-midterm is actually to give you an idea of what my exams are like. Because the worst thing that can ever happen to a student is they study for a test, and then when they take the test, it was nothing like they expected, and so they do poorly on the test. And it's not because they didn't study the material; it's because they weren't prepared for those type of questions. You know, for one year, I just had to laugh. I taught one year. I was teaching biology 100, and a student complained after the pre-midterm that he wasn't expecting diagrams. Right? He wasn't expecting any questions with diagrams, and it's an anatomy class. Biology 100 is an anatomy and physiology class as well. What did you expect if not word questions and diagram questions? But anyway. The main purpose of the midterm is to give you a sample of what the actual midterm will be. The pre-midterm is a preview for the midterm. In addition, as I said, you do an oral exam. We usually do that in week 12 of the course. And then we have a final exam. The oral exam is given in the laboratory, and then the final exam at a date to be announced later is worth 35% of your mark. Okay, so go to the web page as soon as possible, log into your account, and you'll notice that when you get to the course web page, you'll notice that the web page, like the course, is organized into 13 different sections, one for each week. And if you read it, start scrolling down, you'll read it and you'll see what you have to do every single week. Uh, in that web page, you'll find links to the lectures on video, and then you'll also find the lab manual, which is there for you to download. Okay, so you go to the college website and log in. It will show you a list of all of your courses. You click on the one that you're in. In this case, it happens to be 130. And it will give you the web page. You start scrolling downwards, and then you'll see that the web page is organized according to weeks. In this case, we have week 4, the skeletal system, and then you'll notice that there are certain links on the web page that link you to the lectures, right? And then if you want, the lecture is a voiceover PowerPoint slideshow, which like I'm doing right now. If you want to review the slides, you can do that, right? And there are links to those as well. So, as you know, the blue links, the blue texts are links to course resources. Okay, so when you open up the lecture, you have watch the lectures, and remember that you have the option of turning on the transcript. So down at the bottom here, usually on the YouTube page, there's a button that allows you to turn on the transcript, and that allows you to read as well as hear what I'm saying. All right, now a little bit of advice for you. Number one, some people are intimidated at first by the number of new words that you have to learn, and I would suggest that you think about this course as learning a foreign language. I know that many of you know different languages, right? So if you've ever taken a course on how to speak a foreign language, you made lists of words every year, and you tried to every week you made a new list of words that you were trying to memorize, and then you try using the words in a sentence here and there, and that's how you deal with an introductory course in a foreign language. Right, so this is actually, all we're doing here is we are learning the names of body parts that you probably already know the names of, and you're just learning the names of those body parts in Latin or Greek. And Latin, of course, is the language that the Romans used to speak, and a variation of ancient Greek that the ancient Greeks used to speak. Those are two languages that in the 15th century and 16th century and 17th century, the European scientists, in order to be a European scientist, you had to speak those two languages, so that the languages of intellectuals and scientists in the 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th century was Latin and Greek. So if you were an educated scientist, the mark of being an educated scientist was that you could speak Latin and Greek. These days, obviously, we don't find that as important anymore. But in the old days, some of the scientists were speaking English, and some of them speaking French, and some of them speaking German. And they couldn't understand each other. But if they spoke in Latin, they could understand each other. So the science of anatomy and physiology started to become a major science during the Renaissance in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, when all of the scientists knew how to speak Latin. So that explains why anatomy and physiology is filled with Latin words and Greek words. And so, for example, the word fibula refers to a bone in the lower leg. You have two bones in the lower part of your leg. One's called the fibula, one's called the tibia. The fibula looks kind of like a pin. And the Romans used to use a thing called a fibula, which was a little brass pin to hold their cloak on. You put a cloak around your shoulders and you hold it on with a pin. That was called a fibula. And so when the anatomists found out that there was a bone in the leg that looked sort of like a fibula, they called it a fibula. So anyway, that I would advise treating this course not so much like a science course as it is like learning a foreign language. There's a lot of memorization, more memorization than you would have in any other type of a course except a language course. Some people find that intimidating, but other people like it, right? So there's some people there's some courses like philosophy and a lot of the fine arts courses and the liberal arts courses, they encourage less memorization and more lateral thinking, developing ideas, writing essays, and so forth. And some people find that hard, and they actually like the idea of just not having to think too much about anything except memorizing the names of body parts. And that is what the introductory anatomy and physiology lectures are. So a lot of it is learning the names and places of the body parts, and then learning a little bit of the theory about what those body parts do. So that we are going to learn both, but there's a lot more memorization in this course than you might expect from other types of courses. The other advantage is, in this particular flipped format, you can watch the lectures as many as you want. You don't have to wait until Thursday of every week to hear a new lecture, right? You can listen ahead of time a lot, right? So I would advise you to do that, because that allows you to read ahead and listen ahead and start getting way ahead for your anatomy and physiology course, so that you can slow down at the end of the semester when all of your other courses are starting to become more intense, right? So the other courses that where you have to attend a lecture every week, you have no choice but to wait a week between lectures. And then, as you know, often in these university and college courses, the course gets more intense as the semester goes on. In the beginning, you're sort of wandering around aimlessly, not having anything to do because you haven't had many lectures yet. In this course, you can go into the lectures ahead of time, and then you can be prepared so that you can kind of slow down with this course towards the end of the semester as the other courses on your timetable are speeding up. So that is kind of an advantage of having at least one of these hybrid flex courses on your timetable. So I would advise that as soon as possible you go to the web page and look around, and then see if you like what's there. Download the manual as soon as possible and start looking through it. And then after you've had a look at things, if you decide that this course is too much for you, or that it's not something that interests you, all of those things are fine. You have until Monday, September 15th to decide to drop the course. And if you drop the course on Monday, September 15th, you'll get a refund. So you won't have wasted anything on a course that you may not like. If you decide to stay in the course after September 15th, you can drop it up until week 10, but you won't get a refund. So just bear in mind that you still have the option of dropping or withdrawing from the course all the way until week 10. It's just that you won't get any money back. And if you withdraw from the course in week 3, for instance, you get something called a W on your transcript. A W stands for withdrawal, and it means that you withdrew from a course, but it doesn't say why. And so it's kind of like, it's better to, if you have your transcript is your permanent academic record. If you go to any other university or college, they'd want to see your transcript from Columbia. And if you had a course listed there with a W beside it, it means that you withdrew from the course. It does not mean that you failed the course, for instance, right? So it's not. A lot of people withdraw from courses in before week 10 because they're worried that they might fail it, and so you have that option as well. But you don't have to exercise it, and so really your option of dropping the course in week 2 at the beginning of week 2 is just to get your money refunded. All right. So good luck with the course, and I look forward to seeing you all. Thank you very much.